Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, Numerics with Nadia. In today's lesson, we're skipping ahead a little bit. I know we were working through a beginner geometry module, but I received a comment from one of you guys stating that you need help with precalculus and specifically on finding the domain and range of rational functions. So we're going to start off doing a lesson on that today. We're going to split our lesson up into a few sections. First, we're going to go over what is a rational function. We'll do a quick overview of this. Then we'll get into what are domain and range. And lastly, we'll get into a few practice problems solving for the domain and range of rational functions algebraically. I will do another video with you guys after this on how to find the domain and range of rational functions graphically. But today we have a lot of new information, so I wanted to hone in on these main three topics, and then we'll get into graphically, and we'll do some more pre-calculus based topics in these next few videos. But if there are any other topics you guys need help with that are back in the geometry topics or back in Algebra 2, please let me know. But for the meantime, we'll be working on pre-calculus. And to start off, let's define what are rational functions. So a rational function is a function that is written as the ratio of two polynomial functions where the polynomial in the denominator does not equal 0. So this is the formal definition of it. I know reading through it right now, especially for those of you guys jumping from the beginner geometry module, there's a lot of unknown vocab. This video is more so for people in pre-calculus. Regardless though, I'm going to define a few of the words that we may not be as familiar with or that we need a refresher on because they are very, very important for this topic. And I will go ahead and highlight them now. The words are function, ratio, and polynomial. So the way I'll define these, I'll write the word, and then I'll write the definition out, and we will start off with is function. Now, what is a function? A function is a relationship between an input and an output where every input has exactly one output. And I know that this can be a confusing topic for people. If you're in pre-calculus, you should be comfortable with this, but for anyone else who needs another video on this topic you could do a 10 to 15 minute lesson on, and I don't want to just smooth over it for those of you who need it. So please let me know in the comments if you would like me to do a video on what a function is, how to spot it, and all of its characteristics. But for now, this is our definition for function, and we will move on to our next vocabulary term, which is ratio. So a ratio is a method of comparing two different quantities with division. So we have defined 2 out of our 3 vocab words so far. I'll zoom out a little bit so we can define our last term, and this term is very, very important for rational functions, and that is, what is a polynomial? So a polynomial is an algebraic expression with 2 or more terms. So now that we've gone through, we've written out the standard definition of a rational function, we've gone through and we have defined everything, let's kind of put everything together and label and notate what a rational function would look like for our purposes. So I will copy paste the definition to the right here, but a rational function, we'll call it f of x. So f of x, it is the ratio, right, of two polynomial functions where the denominator cannot be 0. So we will state that g of x is a polynomial function, h of x is a polynomial function, but the denominator cannot be 0. And as you will see here, this matches our definition. So we are good with the first part of our lesson. Now we will get into the second part, and we wanted to find what the domain and range of rational functions are. Now that we know what rational functions are, what does domain and range mean? So let's start off with domain. The domain of a function is the set of all inputs x for which f of x is defined. And as you guys know, f of x commonly is also referred to as y when we're thinking graphically or in this term. So the domain is the set of all the inputs x for which y is defined. And now we will go into range. For range, the range of a function is the set of all the outputs f of x as x varies. So two distinctions here. For domain, we're going to think x, we're going to think horizontally. What is the range that this function covers horizontally? For range, we're going to think vertically, we're going to think the y-axis, and we're going to see what is the range of values that this function covers vertically. So now that we've gone through, we have defined what a rational function is, we've gone through our few vocab words, and now we know what domain and range are. Let's get into some practice problems. These practice problems are going to be how to solve for the domain, and I'm going to go through here and write out a few steps for you guys for how to approach these types of problems. All of these problems are rational functions. The numerators differ, which change how we're going to solve it, but as a basic overview of steps, you would set the denominator equal to 0 and solve, and whatever numbers make the fraction, right, this ratio 0, will be excluded from the domain. So if we look at number 1, our numerator is just 4, so it's not a function, so we can leave that and only solve for our denominator. Our denominator is x squared plus x. We'll set that equal to 0, just like in step 1. We'll take out the greatest common factor of x. When we do that, we have x times x plus 1. We'll split these up and solve. So we'll have x equals 0 and then x plus 1 equals 0. The x plus 1 equals 0 just means that x equals -1. So when we go through to write out the domain, this is how I write it. There are other forms as well. So if your teachers use that, let me know in the comments and I can write it in the other forms as well. But I just write all real numbers. And here we've solved x can't be 0 or -1. So now that we've done that, that is it, and we'll move on to our second equation. For this one, we have x divided by the square root of x plus 1. So just like in the last one, we'll set our denominator equal to 0. Here we have the square root of x plus 1 equal to 0. How do we get rid of a square root? Well, we would square something. So we would have 0 squared on the right-hand side, which we know is just 0. So we have x plus 1 equals 0. And when we solve, we get that x equals -1. Now, we know that square root functions, right, the graphs of them are always positive. So we are not going to write all real numbers here. We're just going to start from 0 and greater. But here we also need to include that, because of this denominator, we can't have -1. So the way that I will write this domain out is that x needs to be greater than -1. And now that we've solved for that one, we'll move on to our last practice problem for today. For this one, our numerator is x squared minus 4 and the square root of that. This is going to come into play in a little bit. Our denominator is x plus 3, so we'll set that equal to 0. When we do x plus 3 equals 0 and we subtract, we get that x equals -3. Here, we're also going to include anywhere that the numerator is 0 because if that's 0, then our function would be undefined and we can't have those points in our domain. So if we go ahead and set the numerator equal to 0 as well, we would have the square root of x squared minus 4 equals 0. We will square it to get rid of the square root. Then we'd have x squared minus 4 equals 0. When we add 4 to each side, we get x squared equals 4. Then we'll square root. Anytime you square root, it is plus and minus. So it is +2 and -2. So now I will write my domain out. My domain is all real numbers here. However, our denominator is 0 at -3. So it'd be all real numbers except x cannot be -3, -2, or +2. And that is the last practice problem for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Again, I know it was a little bit of a jump from our beginner geometry playlist, so if there are any gaps or any confusion, please comment down below and I will make sure to clarify that in another video, but I hope you enjoyed it. Please like the video if you did. Comment any questions you have down below or any other topics you would like me to do a video on. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Share this video with a friend, and I will see you guys next time.